Hello, we are back again. This session we're calling New Tools for Deprovisioning Accounts. And we've got John Stewart with us to kind of show some of the work he's been doing to help him make decisions on what account should be deprovisioned. So the purpose kind of showing the work you're doing, hearing about your thought process on this stuff. And like I said, we're kind of ultimately hoping to be able to learn from this as the Reclaim community, maybe pull some of these tools to be usable for other folks as well. So that's the end goal. We probably won't accomplish all of that in 20 minutes, but we want to get started. This is the start.
For the try.
Yeah.
Sounds
so
good.
you want to show us what you've been working on?
Yeah. So the reason for all of this is that we've been running OU Create for 8 years now. I was looking back at our records just before we started, and the earliest users got in July 2014. And so we've had it around for a while. We've got 7,100 users in our domains right now. And so we've got 7 servers, I think, running. And the issue has always been, how do we clean that up occasionally? And so I've developed different ideas for how to identify users that aren't active anymore. And some of that is emailing people, but they don't necessarily read the email or email me back and say, yeah, you can delete my stuff. So one of the ways that we came up with was just seeing, who hasn't been in their site for a while. And so you can see from WHMCS and some of those tools when the last time someone logged in was, but that's if they're logging in through single sign-on and through, the main portal. If they're logging in directly to their website, it's harder to find that information. And I think we mentioned that earlier, a couple hours ago. Even if they're logging in, are they actually doing anything to their site, or is it just sort of sitting there? Was the next question. And so I was trying to find a way to see, when was the last update that somebody had made on their site was. And maybe that's a blog post, maybe it's updating a piece of media, maybe it's updating a page or adding a page, something like that. So it turns out that any updates that you make, whether that's adding media, adding a post, updating a post, any of that shows up in the posts table in your WordPress database. It all goes into this one table. And so if you just look for the last time that a change was made in that one table, that's a pretty good indicator of when the last usage was. And so the script that I wrote looks at, at first it looked at a single user's database and just checked when that last post was, and returned that as I printed it out to a CSV file just so I could look at it as a spreadsheet. And I was really excited when I got that, because I thought, okay, I've written the script. Now it's just a matter of uploading it to my server and running it across all of the, looping it over all users. And I thought that was going to be straightforward, and it's not at all. I thought I could do that with a SQL query, but every single one of these databases is its own SQL database. You can't run, or at least I don't know how to run a SQL query over 7,000 databases. But what I figured out how to do was to take the Installatron information for the servers and get each of the database credentials across all of the servers, and then to just loop it in a Python script. And so it literally just goes database by database and just asks the question, what was the last update to the posts table? And so, this, I think if we've got the share screen that we can pull up, I've got the, so all of this is in a GitHub repository. And I can show the script real quick. It's not particularly interesting, but like I said, maybe the thought behind it is a bit more interesting. But it's using MySQL in Python, and then it's using CSVs both to read and write. And so basically, the first thing that we do in this loop is we import WordPress account list.csv. And so I've got a list of all of the WordPress accounts for each server. And then for each one of those accounts, it tries to connect to the SQL database for that WordPress account. And then it just looks, the query down here on line 29 says, from the posts table, look for the most recent post, and literally just return me the top line for that most recent post on the post table. And so one of the fields in that is the date. And so I pull out the date string on lines, I guess, 31 through 33 or something like that. And then I print the whole thing just to a CSV. And so what I ended up getting was something like this. So this is what Installatron gives you, is a full list of all of the Installatron installs on each server. And so this is from the original OU server, Oklahoma 1, I think. Yeah. And so we have the owner's sort of username, their email address, the path of their site, their URL, database username, the title of their blog. So some of these are just like my blog, which is usually a good indicator that they're not doing a lot with it. And then the installer time will tell you when they installed this app originally, this WordPress app, or whatever other kind of app it is. And then I pulled in this information from this Python script as to when their latest post was. And then I looked for those accounts where the latest post was on the original installation date. And so if they made one post and it was a hello world post, or even if they made one post that was like, I just started up this blog, I wanted to see those and be able to flag those. And then I did, basic subtraction for latest post minus install date. And then, what is this most recent date? And the unique is whether or not this person has more than one WordPress account running. So if it's a 1, that means they've only got one WordPress site running. And if it's more than one, then they have more than one WordPress site running. And so I didn't want to, accidentally delete somebody's account if they have, 2 or 3 WordPress sites running, but one of them is inactive, because obviously I don't want to delete their active sites. So I use this to see, what are the days in use for all of these. So it's actually more like, how long have they been using this thing? So there are 517 days between the latest post for this user and when they originally installed it. And so they've got over a year of active use, whereas some of these other people were only actively using their site for 97 days in this case, in 2019. And then I could also look, for these latest posts, I could filter down to everybody that was, what I ultimately decided was anybody that hadn't updated their site in 3 years were the accounts that I wanted to flag for deletion. And so for each of our servers, there were a decent number of sites that hadn't been updated in 3 years. And so this is sort of the general data for it. How many WordPress installs are there? How many were at least 3 years old? How many are 2 years old? How many are 1 year old? And how many also had no posts since the original installation date? And then I did a couple of other sort of pieces of math. I looked at the mean age. So how long did the average user keep using their site? And the answer was a little less than a year. And what was the median age? And I thought this was really interesting, is that the median and the mean are like vastly different. And what this is telling me is that most of the users in our domain of one's own system use their website for about 3 months. And that's how long a semester is. So I think most users are getting in, setting up a site for one of their classes, and then blogging for that class, and then not using their site again after that class is over. And so that's why the median age is about that length. And then the mean age is inflated because we do have a lot of users who have been using their site for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, 8 years in my case. And so the mean is going to be higher than the median. And I could graph the differences, and I think we'd see sort of a bimodal distribution where most users are undergrads using it for one class. And then there are users like me or other faculty members who have been using it for a long time. And then there are, some other people in between, but I think it's going to be, a bimodal distribution. So I generated email lists off of this of everybody that I wanted to reach out to and what server they were on. And then I worked with Reclaim to email all of these folks and basically tell them, we're planning on deleting your account in, at that point, it was in about 90 days, I think. And, to let me know if you don't want me to. And we did get a decent number of responses, maybe 30 or 40 responses of people saying like, actually, I'd like to keep my account. I promise to use it more often or whatever. And that was
what
fine.
kind of documents did you make them
bloggers.
sign?
I've heard that before.
Yeah, exactly. I had several that had never, done anything beyond Hello World, but they were like, "Oh no, I really want to keep that." It's okay.
Okay.
Cool. So we don't need to. I don't need to get it. I don't need to delete 5,000 or anything. So as long as I can get a few of them off the server, then that's fine.
Did you?
So yeah,
John, did you have any situations where the users were predominantly doing stuff that wasn't application based, like WordPress, like maybe HTML or maybe PHP, or just a custom thing that they wanted to make, almost like the old tilde spaces? They wanted to make a site, set and forget. Or is that really not the case?
yes. So this is a like slightly longer answer than what you're asking for. But the what Installatron shows you is the installer and the type of installation. And so this is all of the different PHP installations. So you can see that for most of our servers, like WordPress is dominant, but there are other types of installations in here, like Omeka and Drupal and all sorts of other stuff. And also it shows you the information for your backups. And so I filtered down for just the WordPress accounts that are current, so not backups and not other installations. And so I'm really only running this script against current WordPress installations, and I'm ignoring people who just have HTML running or who have Drupal or Joomla or Omeka or whatever else. And so this sort of sweep is just focusing on WordPress users, but WordPress users represent probably 90+% of our user base. So yeah, we do have a lot of other types of users, but they're excluded from this whole process.
It's interesting too, because your data, your medians and means, which I'd never seen it broken down like that, and I love that, does reinforce why you're using WordPress multi-site along domain of one's own. Like you actually have the data to demonstrate that. Yeah,
that was the sort of wake up point for me, just seeing that huge gap, and it's confirmed when you actually start looking through the blogs and like clicking on them. And as Taylor was saying, do snapshot of them, is that a lot of them, and I know even what classes they're for. We have a huge journalism class that has 300 students every semester. And those students are primarily blogging for that one class. And we encourage them to keep blogging after that class, but obviously, some aren't.
So Audrey asked a question, and this kind of gets into one of the things that I think is interesting, because so the question is, what do you do when people request you never ask them again, and assume the answer is they always want to keep it?
Yeah.
But before we even get into that, I just want to mention too that I think it's important to note that there's a lot of different ways that I think schools decide on when to deprovision accounts. One of the reasons I'm really excited to be having you talk about this, John, is because I think the way you're making these decisions is cool, and I don't see people doing it this particular way a lot, and I think it's a pretty interesting way. Some folks are very much like, no, like after you graduate, that's it, right? And so that's another way. That's what I did when I was a domains admin. And so obviously that's a little bit different conversation there, but I just wanted to mention that before we get into the question. So did you have that come up, and how did you handle it?
Yeah, a few of the people said, like, I really want to keep the site, and yeah, please don't ask me again, kind of thing. And so I made notes in WHMCS as to, each of these accounts where the person said, like, I'd really like to keep this, or, and so I just made a note saying, this account is sort of whitelisted from future sweeps. And I tried to note, when they emailed me, I tried to note sort of who they were and what type of role they were playing. So if they were faculty, that's a bit easier of a note to like put in there and not worry about for a while. Whereas if they're a student, I might still look in, 2 or 3 more years and just see if they've graduated yet. The problem for us, and part of the reason I'm doing the sweep this way, is that we have a really hard time telling who's left OU. So we've tried to ask our IT department at various times, can you send us a list of emails that you've deprovisioned? And that way I can run it against my list of emails and just see, which one to take off. And that works a little bit, but not great. And often it's too late once they've deprovisioned those emails. I don't have anybody to email anymore because the email doesn't work.
Exactly.
And so, this is a bit more, action oriented and ahead of the curve, but even this isn't great. And so we're still, this is one sweep of like 5 or 6 that I'm trying out. But this one I think is, definitely caught the biggest,
I'm envisioning kind of like, something. So an earlier question that I just someone asked about like a root password to the database so that we wouldn't have to loop through it all. And I think actually in a cPanel environment, the way you did it here is probably the way I would do it as well. And I think it would be possible, it would be some work, but I think it would be possible to eventually, like maybe we could get this to a place where it actually automatically, if via the Installatron API, finds an account, loops through, gets the password, runs the type of code you have. Like that all seems possible to me. Obviously it's the possible. I don't know how long, but it seems.
Yeah. And I don't think there is, at least as far as I could tell, I don't think there is a root MySQL user password, because each of the databases, and maybe there is like a universal one, but as far as I could tell, each database is its own sort of distinct thing. And
that's
so
my understanding, but I'm could be wrong.
But But I did it in 2 steps where I downloaded the information from Installatron. And as you said, I think you could roll that back into the code so that the code goes to each Installatron database, pulls this list for you, and just does it all. And once I fed it the list of accounts that it was supposed to look at, it, it took, I don't know, 10 minutes or something, but it wasn't like your backup, thing that took, 6 hours. So
yeah, 10 minutes is actually, I mean, that's a lot of accounts, right? Like you said, 7,000, 7,100 accounts, something.
Yeah, and I had to batch it for each of our servers, so 1,200 accounts per server or something like that. And so these are WordPress installs also, so there's going to be usually more than there are cPanels, because a decent number of people will have multiple.
The other thing I'm thinking of, and again, this is all, I'm just dreaming a tool here, really, building on your work here, is I think comparing this, adding in, like bandwidth, which is something we can already get from cPanel, right? To have sort of the flip side, right? Here we know how much a site's been edited, and here we know roughly how much a site's been viewed. Obviously, very roughly. Bandwidth is kind of a terrible metric for that, but it's one of the ones we have.
Yeah, I do that sweep also. And so I print off a list of our lowest bandwidth users. And then I also do one based off of our lowest storage users.
Sure.
The storage one is still problematic because, as you all have said, some people just have HTML sites. But even an HTML site will generally be, somewhere in the range of 4 to 10 megabytes.
Sure.
If the total storage on a site, on an account is less than a megabyte, it's a pretty good indication that they're not doing anything.
I think blank cPanels tend to clock in at 1 to 2 usually.
Yeah.
And the other thing I'm thinking about this, or just jogging my brain a little bit as I'm thinking about this, I wonder if it'd be possible to look at times, like date modified timestamps in user folders. That may not be that useful. Like we'd probably have to be choosy about what folders and files we actually care about, right? Because some log files will be written to all the time, but that may be useful too, and be a little bit like for static sites.
It's interesting because whenever you bring up deprovisioning, I think, questions come up like, okay, how does your school keep the email? Like when does they lose access? And Mo asked that question. And I mean, you can lose access to your email, Mo, but then as Jackie pointed out in the comments, still log into a particular application like WordPress
or even
cPanel if you have the username and password that's not single sign-on. So that it really is, it's almost like a policy based in the university. And some people say, for simplicity's sake, 6 months. I know Annika brought this up and you were talking about this. At UMW, we used to say, okay, we have these students who are graduating. We can cross-reference that list with our list of emails we have. And then those are the ones we're deprovisioning in X amount. Get the emails ready, talk to them. Hey, domain in one zone is great. If you love it so much, go set it up on a host of your choice.
You love it so much, pay for it yourself.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, but that's really, and I like the fact of one of the things I think that appeals to folks about WordPress multi-site, and tell me if I'm wrong, John, is that you don't really have to worry to the same degree about archiving because you can have many, many sites. And, it will have problems down the road as Rampages and UMW blogs and many old ones suggest. But at this time, you don't have to worry about cleaning up in the same way immediately because there's no cost associated with it directly.
Yeah, that's a big part of the appeal. And it's, but same types of questions of, one of the things I wish I'd done differently at the beginning was collecting more of the data as to, are you faculty, staff, or student? How long would you like to use this? I'd really like to eventually have something where people can say, I'm only using this for 1 semester. Please delete it for me at the end of the semester.
That's a good use case. Help a lot. That's a good use case for the gravity forms, right? Like maybe tapping some of that stuff at the point, and then knowing that they're part of that journalism class. And then that's another field you search against when you're doing these deprovisionings.
Yeah. The other thing I was going to say is with this script, right now I'm just using it for deprovisioning. But one of the things, it's pretty powerful in that it can access the posts table, and that's where everything is. And so I was thinking earlier from what Taylor was saying about thinking about screenshots of each of the websites, is you could do sort of textual screenshots. You could look at the posts, and maybe you could look at like the about page and see if they've updated their about page, and if you could do some sort of text analysis on whether it says faculty or student or something else that tends to indicate one way or the other. You could do sentiment analysis across posts over a given time period. You could do all sorts of database analysis of the whole of WordPress for your institution. And it's just a matter of, I haven't quite figured out what questions to ask yet. And also there's some not insignificant like ethical considerations over if I'm going to do sentiment analysis, like I probably should get buy-in from people first. So, but you know, I was thinking about various COVID, for example, just doing, you know, some sort of suite for COVID related posts, and then I don't know, collecting those.
That's I mean the sentiment analysis, and I know that we are running on time, and John, as always, you're amazing, and I love hearing the work you're doing. But you know, before we make a digital departure, you got that. I like this whole idea of the, you know, sentiment analysis. It reminds me of like when people run a movie through like a visualizer, and you can see the colors of the movie. Like, what's the colors of your domain of one's own instance, right? Like,
well, one of the things I'm thinking about, so like I didn't mention this, but the web archiving script I have, it does do a text. It does end up with a JSON file of all the text that it's crawled as well. So you could just plug that into a sentiment analysis script, which that requires you to know, or would require, I don't know anything about like sentiment, you know, like that's like machine learning stuff. But I think that would be interesting.
Okay. Well, again, another great session. John, thank you so much for the work you're doing. And I'm glad that, you know, OU has decided to deprovision so many accounts, because we all benefit from learning how you do that, because it's a question we get regularly. So thank you.
Yeah, the code's there for everybody, and then Taylor's going to make it like all work better. So
eventually. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thanks again, John. And we will see you all. The next session is why reclaim cloud, right? So stay tuned.
See you.